To introduce Craig Santos Perez, who is, yes, thank you so much for being here. Before we get started, what I wanted to do was do a quick kind of acknowledgement of the time and space that we're in right now. In terms of, first of all, always, as Pacific Islanders, we always acknowledge the land, but not just the land. It's also the actions that we do on this land. We are on occupied, unceded Ohlone and Ramai land. And what does that mean? All right. Especially when we're talking about Pacific Islander connections and ethics, we're always thinking about how we steward and are in right relationship with the places that we're in. So one of the things that we can think about is moving from a land acknowledgement to land action. There are some really amazing organizations in the Bay Area who are doing land rematriation, reclaiming the land, and putting it back in the hands of its original stewards so that in this time of climate degradation, we are returning and realigning to regenerative economies rather than extractive ones. So here in the Bay Area, you can get involved with land action in terms of actually just getting on the land, getting into rematriation, by checking out the Sigorte Land Trust, which is based in Huchin land, Lisjan Ohlone land in the East Bay. You can also get more involved with some of the work that's being done by Ramai people here out in the West. And not only can you sign up for programs, language revitalization programs, but you can also talk to your employers, and also maybe talk to your families about supporting land rematriation. You can actually get involved with paying the Shumi land tax, which actually can go toward legal fees and all of those sorts of things that indigenous organizers need in order to reclaim their land. Most recently, the Lisjan Ohlone were able to reclaim the Berkeley Shell Mound, and that was actually a multi-million-dollar lawsuit that they won. So there are things that are happening right now here in the Bay Area to get us in right and just transition from an extractive economy into our indigenous regenerative economies now. So moving from a land acknowledgement to land action is something that we can think about every day, right? Honor your ancestors, honor the ancestors that take care of you here in this place. With that, what I'd also like to do is to kind of give a little bit of direction of what we're doing today. For my students in RRS 275, Intro to Pacific Islander Literature, you have your exit ticket in front of you. Please make sure that you're filling that out. It's mostly note-taking, all right, on a lot of the things that Craig will be talking about today. And there's also a little piece on the back that asks you to engage with the Albert Wendt reading that we had from this past week, right? For folks who are not in my class, all right, hold on just a second. Folks who are not in my class, you actually have a handout. Can I see that one quick? On that handout is printed the piece by Teresia Teowa, African-American and Ikiribas writer. This piece is called To Island. Our talk today is actually structured along this piece, right? What I'll do before we introduce Craig, and then I'll actually read this out loud. But there's also some poetry and note-taking prompts that you can fill out as you're listening to either create a poem or actually take notes and questions that you can ask to Craig during our Q&A session at the end of our discussion. All right? So I'll just, for my students as well, you don't have to turn this into me. All right? You can just use it to fill things out, take more notes. And you can also use it to ask questions, all right?
So we can use these for notes?
Yes, yeah, please. Without further ado then, I'm going to introduce Craig Santos Perez. He's a Chamorro writer, essayist, educator, and poet. Born in Mongmontotomaite on Guahan, and is...
Guam?
Yes, it's actually Guam is a mispronunciation of the indigenous name of those islands, which is Guahan. Can everybody say Guahan together?
Guahan.
Guahan, yes.
Guam
So
is actually short for Guaham.
it's not short for, it's a mispronunciation of it. So if we can also hold questions until the end of the discussion, that would be awesome. So Craig is also one of my mentors, is now teaching at Miracosta in San Diego, but also taught at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where he fostered not only my own education as a poet, but also several generations of us as students, has published many of us, has worked with us in terms of literary activism to tell our stories and tell them right. Most recently, Craig won the 2023 National Book Award in Poetry. I believe you're the first Pacific Islander to do this. So Craig is the first Pacific Islander to win that award. And that was for his collection from unincorporated territory, Amat. And Craig has also won the American Book Award for another book of that series, From Unincorporated Territory, Guma. So I highly recommend that you check out Craig's work. Many of his poems are available online. Just one second. Many of his poems are available online, and we'll also hear a lot from Craig today. I'll also ask, please, if we can hold off questions until the very end of our discussion, because we do have some things that we want to share with you
So
today.
Craig won like how many awards?
So many awards, too many to
count.
list. Too many to list, but most recently the National Book Award for Poetry in 2023. Right? So without further ado then, what I'm going to do is actually read from To Island. Craig will then respond to this excerpt, and I will also have a critical question for Craig to talk through. For my students, please feel free to take notes, write down ideas. All right. So this first part from Teresia Teo's piece, To Island, goes as this. Shall we make island a verb? As a noun, it's so vulnerable to impinging forces. Let us turn the energy of the island inside out. Let us island the world. Let us teach the inhabitants of planet Earth how to behave as if we were all living on islands. For what is our Earth but an island in our solar system? An island of precious ecosystems and finite resources. Finite resources, limited space. And I'll turn it over to Craig to respond with a poem or poems.
I want to say hafa adai. Thank you all for having me, and thank you to Dr. Kava for the very generous introduction and for inviting me to share some of my work today. It's been so great seeing you again. It's been a while since we've seen each other, and as Dr. Kava mentioned, we got to study together at the University of Hawaii, and it's really great to see that there's actually a Pacific Islander literature class here at State. And so it's really great that, to see our voices in the curriculum and to see, other people interested in our literature as well. I lived here in the Bay Area for about 15 years, did my master's degree at USF, and then my PhD in comparative ethnic studies at Berkeley. While I was at Berkeley, I specialized in comparative Pacific Islander and Native American literature and culture. And so, I really appreciate the land acknowledgement and action that you encourage. And so I wanted to start with two poems that are kind of also in that spirit of trans-indigenous solidarity. Okay. So the first poem comes from my newest book called Call This Mutiny. This book just published, I think, last month. And this poem I wrote for Indigenous Peoples Day when I was at Cal, thinking about the relations between Pacific Islanders and Native Americans. This poem is called Interwoven. I come from an island and you come from a continent, yet we're both made of stories that teach us to remember our origins and genealogies. I come from an island and you come from a continent, yet we've both been invaded. Magellan breached our reef 30 years after Columbus raided your shore. I come from an island and you come from a continent, yet we've both been baptized in disease and genocide. We've both been disciplined by boarding schools, assimilated by the Western curriculum of fear and silence. I come from an island and migrated to your continent. Hundreds of thousands of us settled in your territories. So busy searching for better lives, we didn't ask your permission. We didn't recognize our American dream was your American nightmare. But today, let us see you reviving your cultures, restoring tribal governments, planting heritage seeds, and blockading pipelines. We acknowledge your lands. I come from an island that we call a blue continent, and you come from a continent that you call Turtle Island. So let us continue interweaving our struggles. Let us cultivate radical hope and decolonial love so our stories will carry us towards sovereign horizons. Thank you. That kind of, Teresia's two-island idea kind of brought me thinking about how we come from islands but also have migrated to this continent and are kind of cultivating that solidarity and learning about these lands that we now call home. Okay, this second poem, also one of solidarity's from my book called Habitat Threshold, and it's a collection of eco-poetry or environmental writing. And many years ago in Hawaii, we had a solidarity event in support of the Standing Rock tribe when they were fighting to protect their waters from pipelines. And so I wrote this poem for that event, kind of connecting water issues and water struggles, both here on Turtle Island, in the Pacific, and around the world. And it is also a call and response poem. And so I'm going to ask all of you to participate as well. When I say the word say, you say water is life.
Say,
Water is life.
Life.
Very nice. This poem is called Chanting the Waters. Say,
water is life.
say,
Water is life.
say,
Water is life.
because our bodies are 60% water. Because water breaks forth from shifting tectonic plates. Because amniotic fluid is 90% water. Because she breathed and breathed and breathed. Because our lungs are 80% water. Because our daughter crowned like a new island. Say,
Water is life.
Water is life.
because we tell creation stories about water. Because our language flows from water. Because our words are islands written on water. Because it takes more than 3 gallons of water to make a single sheet of paper. Say,
Water is life.
because water is the next oil. Because 180,000 miles of U.S. oil pipelines leak every day. Because we wage war over gods and water and oil. Say,
Water is life.
because our planet is 70% water. Because only 3% of global water is fresh water. Because it takes 2 gallons of water to refine 1 gallon of gasoline. Because it takes 20 gallons of water to make a pound of plastic. Because it takes 600 gallons of water to make 1 hamburger. Because the average American water footprint is 2,000 gallons a day. Say,
Water is life.
because 1 billion people lack access to drinking water. Because women and children walk 4 miles every day to gather clean water and deliver it home. Say,
Water is life.
because our bones are 30% water. Because our bodies won't survive a week without water. Because corporations privatize, dam, and bottle our waters. Because plantations divert our waters. Because animal slaughterhouses consume our waters. Because pesticides, chemicals, lead, and waste poison our waters. Say,
Water is life.
because they bring their bulldozers and drills and drones. Because we bring our feathers and lei and sage and shells and canoes and hashtags and totems. Because they call us savage and primitive and riot. Because we bring our treaties and the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Because they bring their banks and politicians and paychecks and pepper spray and bullets. Because we bring our songs and schools and prayers and chants and ceremonies. Because we say stop, keep the oil in the ground. Because they say shut up and vanish. But we are not moving. Because we bring all our relations and all our generations and all our live streams. Say,
Water is life.
because our drumming sounds like rain after drought echoing against taut skin. Because our skin is 60% water. Say,
Water is life.
because every year millions of children die from waterborne diseases. Because every day thousands of children die from water-borne diseases. Because by the end of this poem, 5 children will die from water-borne diseases. Say,
Water is life.
because my daughter loves playing in the ocean. Because someday she'll ask, where does the ocean end? Because we'll point to the dilating horizon. Because our eyes are 95% water. Because we'll tell her ocean has no end. Because sky and clouds lift ocean. Because mountains embrace ocean into blessings of rain. Because ocean, sky, rain fills aquifers and lakes. Because ocean, sky, rain, lake flows into the Missouri River. Because ocean, sky, rain, lake, river returns to the Pacific and connects us to our cousins at Standing Rock. Because our blood is 90% water. Say,
Water is life.
because our hearts are 75% water. Because I'll teach my daughter our people's word for water, Hanum, Hanum, Hanum. So the sound of water will always carry her home. Say,
Water is life.
say,
Water is life.
say.
Water is life.
Awesome. Give yourselves a round of applause. That was great. Thank you. Yeah, great performance.
I have a question for Craig, and it is tied to the title of our event. And for my students, this is something that we're going to be examining as well. And it's also a gift that I would like to give to our guests as well, who are not part of our class. And the question is, what would you say, Craig, are Pacific Islander poetics? Can you talk about that a little bit? What are these?
Yes. So I taught for 12 years at the University of Hawaii in the English department, mainly teaching Pacific Islander poetry, poetics. And so I've had a lot of time to think about this question, to both study, research, and to teach Pacific Islander poetry. And it's special because obviously it's the literature of our own peoples. But of course, in class, there are many students who were not of Pacific Islander descent, and so also got to not only teach literature to kind of the next generation, but also to those kind of outside our culture, as a kind of a way to bring them into Pacific Islander culture. And for me, when we talk about traditional Pacific Islander literature and poetics, we're really talking about orature. Throughout the Pacific, there's such a rich tradition of oral literature, storytelling, chanting, genealogies, histories, even kind of drama, and other kinds of like poetic, lyrical speech. Some of it tied to song, some of it a cappella. And when you read these oratures now, as they're described or transcribed or even listen to them, so many of the major themes we see that our ancestors wrote about is similar to what we write about today. And so so much of the content of traditional Pacific literature is, of course, cultural history. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of custom and practices kind of expressed in these oratures. The environment and our relationship to the environment is another major theme. Animals, of course, who our ancestors were entangled and interacting with, also a major topic in these oratures. And so when scholars talk about Pacific literature, we often talk about these stories or chants or songs as canoes, as vessels of knowledge and custom passed down through the generations. Now, written, or at least alphabetic Pacific literature is more of a modern phenomena. Kind of the technology of the alphabet and writing and the printing press really doesn't come to the Pacific until a period of colonization, where kind of the European nations were bringing these new technologies, kind of transcribing and translating the languages. And then, of course, because colonialism, our peoples were also taught how to write in these colonial languages. And so you see a lot of writing emerging in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. These are a lot of nonfiction writing, a lot of like newspapers, journalism, and then also some transcriptions of the ancient kind of orature that was passed down. In more of a contemporary sense, when we talk about like fiction, novels, poetry, short stories, these kinds of Western genres, they more appear in the 20th century. And really after 1950s, 1960s, when the Pacific starts to become decolonized, local universities start to appear throughout the Pacific, and then literature from across the so-called third world or post-colonial world were taught to that generation. And they were, of course, inspired by writers from Africa, from the Caribbean, and even Native American writers. And, they get inspired to tell our own stories, right? Because they're being taught all this colonial or international curriculum. And when you look at today's, like, written literature, it has many of the same themes as the traditional literature: culture, history, politics, memory, tradition, custom, the environment, spirituality, and so on. The main difference is in these kind of new genres, and of course it's printed and written out. Epeli Hau'ofa, who would be a scholar I believe you started to study, he describes kind of our contemporary written literature as being similar to kind of listening to invisible storytellers, as he puts it. Because he sees our written tradition as part of a continuum of the orature, okay? But just using new technology, and in many cases, colonial languages. So I always love that, thinking about the writer as an invisible storyteller. And he talks about reading as an act of listening to this, to the invisible storyteller. And so he sees this kind of oral tradition embedded in the written tradition, in the written practices today. And then he also, of course, with orature, there's always an audience, right? And that's kind of similar to how he thinks about kind of the reader and the writer relationship, is that it's a collaboration. Okay? So the orator could stand up and, say the chant or whatever, but the audience, usually has to respond with something. And similar to reading, right, as a reader, kind of your response is, to try to analyze or interpret or understand or navigate this text. Okay. So it's navigation, listening, reading, these are all kind of forms of interacting with Pacific literature. And, the poem I read earlier about Water is Life, has that similar kind of oral tradition vibe, but obviously very contemporary. And so that's a little bit about poetics. What the poems look like on the page is very diverse. So Pacific writers, Pacific literature, in and of itself, all the writers have different styles, different personalities, different voices, and different techniques, ranging from like the really avant-garde and experimental to like sonnets. Okay. So you don't necessarily, we all write differently, but like I said, kind of the core and the tradition very much related. If that makes sense. Feel like I'm lecturing back in class again.
All right. I'm going to move on to this next piece. All right.
Are we moving on to Pacific Island poetics?
In just a minute, yes. So I'm going to now read again from To Island, from Teresia Tewa, right? And then we're going to go on that same pattern. I'll read a part from this piece, Craig will read a poem or two, and then I have a critical question for him, all right? So from Teresia, the islanded must understand that to live long and well, they need to take care. Care for other humans, care for plants, animals, care for soil, care for water. Once islanded, humans are awakened from the stupor of continental fantasies. The islanded can choose to understand that there is nothing but more islands to look forward to. Continents do not exist, metaphysically speaking. It is islands all the way up, islands all the way down, islands to the right of us, and islands to the left.
So that quote made me think of several poems from again, this book, Habitat Threshold, where I kind of explore that theme of blood ivory. And it takes place at the Honolulu Zoo. I wrote this poem many years ago, maybe like 10 years ago. I took my eldest daughter there, and it happened to be World Elephants Day. And then maybe one thing I should say for context is, at that time I was writing this poem, there was a bill in the Hawaii Congress to ban the ivory trade in Hawaii. And even though Hawaii is a very small state, in terms of the buying and selling of illegal ivory, it actually has a third largest market behind New York and California. And partly, Hawaii being between Europe, the Americas, and Asia is where a lot of the, on one hand, where a lot of the ivory is taken and then sold into Asia. And so there's a bill at that time also. Blood ivory. When we reach the elephant enclosure, I lift my daughter up so she can see them playing in shallow ponds. Look, I say, they love the water just like you. Today, 96 elephants are being massacred across Africa's scarred savanna. Armed poachers surround the herds who stomp, trumpet, and encircle their calves. Bullets, those small human tusks, bite through thick, wrinkled skin. Do the men still feel awe or majesty, or do they only feel their own awful poverty as they sever the incisors once used to split bark and forage? Warlords will sell this white gold to be carved into jewelry, relics, and art, then smuggled across the planet, our man-made elephant graveyard. This year, 35,000 will be slain. Our daughter waves goodbye to them as we walk towards the exit. Do we build zoos to save what we've sacrificed, to display what we dominate, or to cage our own wild urge to kill every breathing being? My daughter plays with a stuffed elephant doll in the gift shop. Look, I say, it has ears, eyes, and a mouth just like you. She touches its tusks, smiles, then touches her own teeth. The next poem, that time I was writing this book, my first daughter was born, and so, we're doing a lot of like kids stuff, and then I was also reading a bunch of, kids books to her. And I was reading her Dr. Seuss, and kind of the rhythm of the book like got into my head. And so I kind of wrote an imitation poem. I call it a recycling of Dr. Seuss, because I'm taking like the same syntax and rhythm and rhyme, but just putting different content into that structure. So this poem is called One Fish, Two Fish, Plastics, Dead Fish. Some fish are sold for sashimi, some are sold to canneries, and some are caught by hungry slaves to feed what wealthy tourists crave. Farm fish, fish sticks, frankenfish, collapse. From the Pacific to the Atlantic, from the Indian to the Arctic, from here to there, dead zones are everywhere. Overfishing, purse seine, ghost fishing, bycatch. This one has a little radiation. This one has a little mercury. Oh me, oh my, what schools of bloated fish float by. Here are fish that used to spawn, but now the water is too warm. Some are predators and some are prey. Who will survive, I can't say. Say, look at its tumors. 1, 2, 3. How many tumors do you see? 2 fish, 1 fish, filet-o-fish, no fish. This next poem is kind of crazy, but since Thanksgiving's coming up, can I read a Thanksgiving poem?
Get after it. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So, yeah.
All right, this season. Thank you, NAFTA, for making life dirt cheap. Thank you, Butterball Turkey, for the word butterball, which I repeat all day. Say it with me, butterball. Butterball. Butterball.
Butterball.
Because it helps me swallow the bones of genocide. Thank you, dark meat, for being so juicy. No offense, dry and fragile white meat, you matter too. Thank you, 90 million factory farm turkeys, for giving your lives during the holidays. Thank you, factory farm workers, for clipping turkey toes and beaks so they don't scratch and peck each other in overcrowded dark sheds. Thank you, stunning tank, for immobilizing most of the turkeys hanging upside down by crippled legs. Thank you, stainless steel knives. Thank you, scalding hot defeathering tank, for finally killing the last still conscious turkeys. Thank you, turkey tails, for feeding Pacific Islanders all year round. Thank you, Empire of Slaughter, for your fatty leftovers. Thank you, tryptophan, for the promise of an afternoon nap. And thank you, dear listeners, for joining me at the table of this poem. Please join hands, bow your heads, and repeat after me. Let us bless the hands that harvest and butcher our food.
Bless the hands that harvest and butcher our food.
Bless the hands that drive delivery trucks and stock grocery shelves.
Bless the hands that drive delivery trucks and stock grocery shelves.
Bless the hands that cooked and paid for this meal.
Bless the hands that cooked and paid for this meal.
Bless the hands that bind our hands and force feed our endless mouth.
Bless the hands that bind our hands and force feed our endless mouth.
May we forgive each other
May we forgive each other
and be forgiven.
and be forgiven.
Thank you all.
I have a question for Craig.
Now that I've ruined Thanksgiving.
And tactics do you see Pacific Islander poetics giving to climate justice activism?
That's a great question. So as I mentioned, so much of Pacific literature going back thousands of years, the environment and our relationship to the environment, to the lands and waters, as well as, of course, animals, is a central theme. And, so much of our traditional literature, teaches us that the land and water is our ancestors, is our kin. And, teaches us as well that, animals, they have many symbolic meanings in the Pacific and across the Pacific. But also there's that same idea where we are genealogically connected to animals as well. And beyond that, in a lot of our traditional lit, there's many stories of like where the different plants come from and different foods come from. And so you have a lot of origin stories about like the coconut tree or the breadfruit tree. And, similarly, these stories also, kind of assert that we are related as well to these plants. And, of course, the land, the water, the animals, the plants, they all feed us too. They all take care of us. They all raise us. And so there's a kind of environmental ethics embedded in these stories where that if, the entire ecology, is our ancestors, is our genealogical kin, takes care of us, feeds us, gives us life, gives us shelter, gives us canoes, everything, that we should therefore treat the more than human world with the deepest respect and the deepest gratitude, and to always act act with sustainability in mind. Oftentimes if you go on a hunt or go harvesting, our elders will always tell us, just take what you need. And, don't be greedy. Just bring what you need. If you're bringing it also for other people in your village or for your family members, just enough for them. Save everything for other people, for other families, or to come back and harvest later. And so, that environmental ethic through literature has been passed down to our contemporary writers. And I got to work with Dr. Kava editing this anthology. That's kind of why we put it together, was to show that, there is such a diversity of environmental knowledge that we can learn from by reading our literature. Now, a section of this anthology actually is focused on climate change. Even though our ancestors didn't write about what we call climate change today, that's a reality for our Pacific Islands and our peoples, and so it's become now a major theme in our literature. Part of the reason is, because it is an existential threat in the Pacific, and our shorelines are changing, our islands are changing. It's hotter, it's floods so often, the tides are rising, and so on. And so, we see it all around us, and it's very traumatic. And so, so much of literature comes out of trying to process and reckon with those difficult emotions that we feel. And so if you read those literature, you'll see, a lot of human responses to these global environmental changes, these impacts that we're seeing across the Pacific. And in terms of how we then move from literature to activism, what's been really inspiring is that a lot of our Pacific artists, writers, musicians have become involved in climate justice movements, and in many ways are at the forefront of these movements. Our co-editor, Kathy Jetno-Kijner, a Marshallese poet and climate envoy now of the Marshall Islands, she performed her poetry in front of the United Nations, at the various conference of parties, the COPs, as well as many environmental events. Besides Kathy, there's many other examples I could give of art writers performing their poetry, reading their work at climate marches, at protests, at local, national, and international events and forums to raise awareness about climate. Now, that activism is important, because it's one thing to write a poem, publish it, put it in a book. Maybe some students will read it, right? And so, but it's just as important, just as we talked about from going to acknowledgement to action, where we often go from literature to action as well, okay? And so when we could share our poems at these public events, we can not only show them what's happening in the Pacific, how it makes us feel as human beings, and hopefully to educate people as well, to advocate for new climate policies, and then of course to inspire and empower people, especially our own people too. So much of literature is about that. That's the whole essence of it, is to show the humanity in these experiences, to dignify, to educate, to empower, and hopefully to change and to lead to change. And so, so that's kind of some of the strategies and tactics, a lot of personal stories about what's happening in the Pacific, a lot of kind of making connections as well, since so much of thinking ecologically is about seeing that everything is interconnected and all peoples are interconnected. Our struggles are interwoven, as I say in one of my poems. Okay? And so we need people from the Pacific and from other parts of the world that have been marginalized, that are often invisible and forgotten at these international forums, that come from places that don't have as many resources. And so, poetry, literature, it gives us that voice and that space to express our deepest emotions, thoughts, feelings. And of course, as I said earlier, as a canoe, as a vessel for politics and history and activism.
I just have 2 more rounds of going through this, like a quote, response, and question, and then we're going to open it up to any responses, questions that you have for Craig. Give me just 1 minute, please. Yes. So we will get to that in just a minute. I'll guide us to that. All right. So here we go. All right. Moving on to this next piece, I'm continuing on from to island. All right. So, and this is the last piece of this before I go on to our last quote from Teresia. So, yes, there is a sea of islands, and sea can be a verb, just as ocean becomes a verb of awesome possibility. But let us also make island a verb. It is a way of living that could save our lives. And I'll have Craig respond to that last piece.
Yes.
However you want to.
Okay. I'm so good. So this quote made me think of a poem again from this book. This poem is called Praise Song for Oceania. Is that okay if I read this one?
Please.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I wrote this poem for World Oceans Day. And I apologize, but it's also a call and response poem. So I need you folks one more time. So in the tradition of praise songs, I'm gonna ask you when I hold up the number one. Let's do this. When I hold number one, say praise. Okay. And if I hold number two, say please. Okay.
So number one,
Praise.
number two,
Please.
yeah. Praise.
Song for Oceania.
Praise.
Your capacity for birth, fluid currents and trenchant darkness.
Praise.
Our briny beginning, source of every breath.
Praise.
Your capacity for renewal, ascent into clouds and descent into rain.
Praise.
Your underground aquifers, rivers and lakes, ice sheets and glaciers.
Praise.
Your watersheds and hydrologic cycles.
Praise.
Your capacity to endure the violation of those who map you, aqua nullius, who claim dominion over you, who pillage and divide your body into latitudes and longitudes, who scar your middle passages.
Praise.
Your capacity to survive, our trawling boats breaching your open wounds and taking from your collapsing depths.
Praise.
Your capacity to dilute our heavy metals and greenhouse gases, sewage and radioactive waste, pollutants and plastics.
Praise.
Your capacity to bury our shipwrecked and ruined cities.
Praise.
Your watery grave, human reef of bones.
Praise.
Your capacity to remember your library of drowned stories, museum of lost treasures, your vast archive of desire.
Praise.
Your tidalectics, your migrant routes and submarine routes.
Praise.
Your capacity to smother whales and fish and wash them ashore, to save them from our cruelty, to show us what we're no longer allowed to take, to starve us like your corals starved and bleached, liquid lungs choked of oxygen.
Praise.
Your capacity to forgive.
Please.
Forgive our territorial hands and acidic breath.
Please.
Forgive our nuclear arms and naval bodies.
Please.
Forgive our concrete dams and cabling veins.
Please.
Forgive our deafening sonar and lustful tourisms.
Please.
Forgive our invasive drilling and deep sea mining.
Please.
Forgive our extractions and trespasses.
Praise.
Your capacity for mercy.
Please.
Let my grandpa catch just one more fish.
Please.
Make it stop raining soon.
Please.
Make it rain soon.
Please.
Spare our fragile farms and fruit trees.
Please.
Spare our low-lying islands and atolls.
Please.
Spare our coastal villages and cities.
Please.
Let us cross safely to a land without war.
Praise.
Your capacity for healing,
Praise.
your cleansing rituals,
Praise.
your holy baptisms.
Please.
Protect my daughter when she swims in your currents.
Praise.
Your capacity for hope,
Praise.
your rainbow warrior and peace boat,
Praise.
your hokulea and sea shepherd,
Praise.
your Arctic sunrise and freedom flotillas,
Praise.
your nuclear-free and independent Pacific movements,
Praise.
your marine stewardship councils and sustainable fisheries,
Praise.
your radical seafarers and native navigators,
Praise.
your sacred water walkers,
Praise.
your activist kayaks and traditional canoes,
Praise.
Your ocean conservancies and surf rider foundations.
Praise.
Your whale hunting and shark finning bands.
Praise.
Your sanctuaries and no-take zones.
Praise.
Your wave and tidal energy.
Praise.
Your blue humanities.
Praise.
Your capacity for echolocation.
Praise.
Are names for you that translate into creation stories and song maps. Tasi, Kai, Tai, Moana Nui, Vasa, Tahi, Vaitui, Wanso, Wara.
Praise.
Your capacity for communion.
Praise.
Our common heritage.
Praise.
Our pathway and promise to each other.
Praise.
Our most powerful metaphor.
Praise.
Your vision of belonging.
Praise.
Our endless saga.
Praise.
Your blue planet, one world ocean.
Praise.
Our transoceanic past, present, future flowing through our blood.
So my question for Craig after this, and thank you all again for participating in that one. My question is for Craig, who is also a creative writing educator. So not only teaching about the Pacific, but also nurturing young creative writers. Many of you, actually all of you, are creative writers. So my question is, what guides, considerations, or questions would you want to recommend to someone who is new to Pacific Islander communities, histories, and stories? And what would you want them to consider as they prepare to learn, search, and connect intentionally with Oceania?
I guess for me, as an educator, but also as a poet and scholar, traveled across the states and around the world talking about the Pacific. It gets overwhelming, like how many stereotypes people have about the Pacific, and how often offensive these stereotypes are, and how often reductive they can be and dehumanizing. And so, it's important, obviously, for all of us to recognize and acknowledge what our biases and stereotypes are about the other, because we all have them, of course. It's often a part of being raised in a very racialized society. And so the first thing I would say is to, obviously acknowledge and recognize whatever stereotypes you might have, to interrogate where they come from, and to really put them aside, and to realize that, stereotypes are just that. They're types, they're caricatures. Okay, they don't capture like the depth of humanity. And so that would be the first thing, to, put those aside and really to be open to moving beyond stereotypes and to really seeing, the deeper, truer, more complex cultures and histories of the Pacific with an open mind, and obviously an open heart as well. Beyond that, I think a great place to start in terms of learning new cultures is through the literature and through the stories, music and film and so on. So much of our culture is expressed through the humanities, and for me, it's more fun than just reading a history book or anthropology book or something like that. And so I think learning about other cultures can be fun if you approach it through the humanities, through the creative arts, through music and so on. And then I have to say it, but you got to eat some food.
Yeah, that's right.
So much of Pacific culture is also expressed in food, and you can learn so much through food. I teach a class on food literature, and for me, I love that context because we all engage with food every day. We're all kind of pseudo foodies these days, and so to me, it's great. Check out the local Pacific restaurants in town, and get to know folks through their food. I think it's a great way, another great kind of entrance into these studies. And then, of course, you could find amazing teachers and professors. Take their classes. Whatever events are going on here in the city. I live in San Diego now, and even though it's not the Pacific Islands, there's plenty of islanders in San Diego, and lots of Pacific Islander festivals, one happening like this weekend. And, so they're kind of fun festival-like ways, I think, to get involved in culture. And I feel like that's a strong gateway to then, reading the major historians and the major scholars if that's interested to you. And so again, diving into this work, that's exactly what you find is that, Pacific Islanders, even though we have a lot in common culturally, there's so much diversity, so much interesting political history, and, just so much beautiful life that, to me, it's kind of becomes, at least for me, it has been a lifelong study. And, very inspiring people.
Thanks, Craig.
Yeah.
I have one more quote to share, and it is still by Teresia Tewa, but it is a different quote outside of this piece. And it's a quote that you might actually find very often when searching for Teresia's work. And the quote is, "We sweat and cry salt water, so we know that the ocean is really in our blood." It's one of the most famous quotes, most popularized quotes that you will get from Terry's work. And I wanted to kind of end with that, and then after Craig reads, and I have one final question, then we'll open it up for any thoughts, questions that you have for Craig. So again, the quote from Teresia is, "We sweat and cry salt water, so we know that the ocean is really in our blood." I'm going to follow that one.
Yeah, that's true. So this poem made me think about crying, I guess, because I think that's one of the most striking things about this sentence, is that we cry salt water. And I'm thinking about a poem from my new book. I had an experience in 2010, my second book came out, and I was born and raised in Guahan until I was 15 years old. And then my family migrated here to the Bay Area, where I finished high school. And I was gone from home for 15 years. I wasn't able to go back just because the tickets are so expensive. And so I wasn't able to go back again until 15 years later. Like I said, my second book just came out. And I went back home to kind of read to a bunch of the local high schools and the University of Guam, just to share my poetry with the community and my families. And I got to visit a kind of an honors English class at one of Guam's public high schools. And I read my poetry, and afterwards I noticed that one of the students was crying. And so I asked her, is she okay? And then she said something to me that I never forgot, and became the kind of core of this poem, which I'll share. This poem is called "The Pacific Written Tradition." I read aloud from my new book to an English class at one of Guam's public high schools. Afterwards, a student is crying. "What's wrong?" I ask. She says, "I've never seen our culture in a book before. I just thought we weren't worthy of literature." I wonder how many young islanders have dived into the depths of a book only to find bleached coral. We were taught that missionaries were the first readers in the Pacific because they could decipher the strange signs of the Bible. We were taught missionaries were the first authors because they possessed the authority of written words. Today, studies show that Islander students read and write below grade level. It's natural, experts claim. Your ancestors were an illiterate, oral people. Do not believe their claim. Our ancestors deciphered signs in nature, interpreted star formations and sun positions, cloud and wind patterns, wave currents, and ocean efflorescence. That's why Master Navigator Papa Mao once said, quote, "If you can read the ocean, you will never be lost," end quote. Now let me tell you about Pacific written traditions, how our ancestors tattooed their skin with scripts of intricately inked genealogies, how they carved epics into hard wood with a sharpened point, their hands, and the pressure and responsibility of memory. how they stenciled petroglyphic lyrics on cave walls with clay, fire, and smoke. So the next time someone tells you our people were illiterate, teach them about our visual literacies, our ability to read the intertextual sacredness of all things. And always remember, if we can write the ocean, we will never be silenced.
Thank you so much, Craig. My last question is drawing also from Albert Wendt's work, but I also want to acknowledge that Teresia Teo's work was also in that poem, in her essay, What Is Yet to Be Seen. And it's her argument that it's actually a colonial story that our people are illiterate because we were able to read our entire ecosystem. And then colonizers came and said, this was the only way to read. This is the only text. And therefore took away our definitions of what it means to read. So that's why the title of our course is How to Read an Ocean. So I also wanted to draw from Albert Wendt's work. Some of my students have read Towards a New Oceania, but there's another essay that we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks. And it's called Tatauing the Postcolonial Body. And what Al Wendt is talking about there is that in our Tatau traditions, to earn Tatau, the tapping, sacred Tatau, you had to earn it. And as you even as you're receiving it, you are earning it. Because it's a lot of pain. You are not given any pain medication. You are surrounded by your people in a sacred ceremony. And it squeezes you. It squeezes you sometimes to like your limits of endurance. And what he does in that essay is actually shift to us as Pacific Islanders to look at literature as if it's a body, that we tatau. Can literature, as it's defined through text in these different ways, can literature hold our stories? Can it earn our trust? Can it actually serve its responsibility? And that's the question that he's asking by using that metaphor of tatau. And so what I wanted to ask Craig as our last question before we go into sharing and question and answer, and questions, is for our Pacific Islander students, families, and our broader communities, what do you want literature to do for us? What words, guidance, hopes, or plans would you want to give to our people when it comes to literature and poetics?
That's a great question. I think for me, when I first started writing, so I did my MFA program at USF, as I mentioned. It's back in 2004, so 20 years ago. I was 24 years old and gone through like college and 3 years of high school here in the Bay, and was never taught like any kind of Pacific literature in any of my classes. And so, and growing up on Guam, because there's a colonial American school system there. When I was growing up, we were only ever taught American authors too. And so I grew up my whole life not even knowing we had a literature, not even knowing there was anything, such as Pacific Islander literature. This was also when I was younger, like before the internet, so you couldn't just, Google it. It was very hard to buy books even. You couldn't just go online and purchase it on Amazon or whatever. And so, that made me feel really invisible and felt like the place I came from didn't matter. And the stories of the place I came from, also were not being told. And so for me, after I finished my undergrad degree and went into the master's degree, I wanted to write a book of poetry about Guahan and Chamorro experiences, because I had never seen that before. And so, and a lot of the stories I wanted to write about, I didn't read those poems today, but they're stories about my grandparents. And, I had done kind of like oral interviews with my grandparents, really just hanging out with them, like talking story. And they had such interesting lives. They're not like famous politicians or anything like that. But to me, they had really interesting lives, and I wanted to write their stories. And so my first couple of books was mostly about them. And, you know, when I had that experience with the student I mentioned that poem, and I was like, damn, a lot of people must feel this way. Being in class, feeling that, you know, that our people aren't worthy of literature because we don't see ourselves in any of the books we're being taught. And so, you know, I wanted to change that. And I wanted, you know, our people to feel that our stories do matter and our cultures do matter. And by doing so, to bring pride and dignity to my, you know, to my grandparents, but also to all our people. And so, you know, I was lucky to get my first 2 books published. My grandparents were still alive when it came out. And my grandfather, I'll never forget, like I wrote about his life in my book, and he was, first time I saw him, he had the book, and he was like super proud. And he put his hand on my shoulder, he's like, they can never take our stories away from us. And to me that was very profound. And so I always kind of take that with me too, to know that, you know, it's not just about the writing and the publishing, but it's also about, you know, that feeling of empowerment, knowing that our stories are here, they can't silence us. And part of what I wrote about my grandfather, he grew up during the first part of American colonization on Guam, and the school system then, they would like punish the kids for speaking our native language because they were trying to like force feed them English. And so he has a lot of like traumatic memories. So I wrote a little bit about that. And, you know, so for me, kind of bringing that dignity and worth and respect and pride to my family and to our people is my main motivation. And then, you know, as a publisher, as an editor, you know, obviously I'm just one person. I can't tell all the stories of even my own people, let alone of the entire Pacific. And so, you know, I also dedicated my, you know, part of my life to creating anthologies, creating spaces for other Pacific writers to share their stories as well, to do the same for their people, and then hopefully to get these books into the classrooms throughout the Pacific, so that our kids back home, you know, don't have that same experience of feeling invisible or less than, where they can feel pride and they can be inspired and they can write their own stories from a young age. And so it's been beautiful to see over the past 20 years, you know, not only being able to publish my own work and circulate that in the community, but then also creating these other books, you know, circulate other communities, to be taught in the schools, and then to inspire the next generation. And, you know, like I said before, so much of our literature is also activist and political. And so I feel very proud of how powerful Pacific literature has become in the climate justice movement, environmental justice, and in other struggles. And so for me, I just want to see like books in every home, our voices in all the schools, and it's cool seeing Pacific Lit courses like this taught, you know, obviously, you know, here in San Francisco all the way to Germany. Which is pretty dope.
Thank you so much, Craig. Can we have another round of applause for Craig? So what we can, we have until 5:30, so what I'd like is to open up the floor for my students. If you have any questions from your notes that you wrote down, please feel free to ask those. For those who are not in my class, if you have questions for Craig, or if you want to share anything that came up for you as we were reading through Teresia's piece. But I wanted to open it up for questions so that we can do this. Yes. Who wants to start? Lotte.
So I have a question for Craig. You mentioned that you came here at a young age and then you didn't return to Wuhan until after your second book, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So were there any challenges to like writing about your home when you were gone for so long?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, as I said, I was 15 years old when I came to California. And it was definitely hard partly because, when I was studying literature in school, I was always reading other people's literature. And so I could get inspired by, learning how to write in that way. But it was definitely a challenge not to have like writers from the Pacific that I could study, that I knew about in terms of inspiration. So it was always kind of like translating from other cultures. So that was hard. It was also tricky because, no one had really heard of Guam before, even in my master's program. And thankfully I had like a couple teachers who were like super supportive, just like, okay, just keep writing about it. Like, that's your homeland. It's important to you. If that's a project you want to do, go for it. I can't, and my teacher was like, I can't guarantee anyone's ever going to publish it. And I was like, damn. But, so that was like, all right, then, if no one's going to publish it, I got to do it, because it like matters so deeply to me. Not because there's going to be like a reward at the end. And so that was a little bit of a struggle too. But then when I did finish the manuscript, I started to send it out to publishers. They were all like, we've never heard of this place before. We can't sell this book either because no one's going to buy it. No one's ever heard of this place. There's no market for it. And so I got like so many rejections. And I even had one editor who was like, no one's heard of Guam. Why don't you write about Hawaii instead? Because at least Americans know a little bit about Hawaii. And so that kind of like, it's really discouraging. But I like really believed in the book and in the stories I was telling. And I was lucky to, speaking of Hawaii, like my first publisher, I had to go to Hawaii to get my book published. Because like I said, no one here in the continent really believed in it. And so I was lucky to find a publisher in Hawaii. And then my second book, I was able, the first book did well. So then the second book, I was able to get a publisher here in California. And so that was kind of the main struggle, like being told that no one's ever going to publish this book. You can do it, but it'd kind of be a waste of time. And then having put 2 years to write it, and then even after that, publisher saying, we can't publish it, we can't sell it, no one's going to buy it. And then last year I won the National Book Award, because fuck them.
Yeah. That's
I like it now.
right.
You wish you published my book.
Yeah, 2015 American Book Award, 2023 National Book Award. Yeah, it's just don't stop. Can't stop. Yeah, there you go. Don't stop. We have time for a couple more questions. Mohammed.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm an English education major here at SF State,
nice.
and so as someone who is an English lit professor, right? And you teach what you could call like the conqueror's language, right? What do you think like is the role of the English language itself in decolonizing and empowering people?
Wow, great
Awesome
question.
question.
Yeah.
Love that.
So yes, I've had kind of a weird journey, academic journey, where, my MFA is in creative writing, my PhD is in ethnic studies. I taught for 12 years in the English department, but now I teach in the ethnic studies department. And so I've kind of been going like back and forth, partly because there's so much interconnection between literature and culture, right? But having taught in the English department for a long time, English departments are very contested spaces, as they probably are here on this campus. And traditionally, obviously, they're mostly teaching British and American literature, and the Anglophone canon. That's changed over the past 50 years. Now English departments are teaching, kind of global Anglophone literature, so literatures from, like from Africa and other places. And then they're also become more diverse. And they're from starting like the 70s and 80s and so on. So now you have English departments teaching multicultural literature. Some English departments even teach decolonial, post-colonial lit. Some teach native lit. The really cool ones teach Pacific Islander literature. Some departments have changed more than others. I've performed my poetry at many different universities, a lot of English departments. And it depends where you are in the country, how diverse they actually are. Where I think the decoloniality aspect comes in is when English departments are willing to teach these other literatures, right? That used to be considered other and minor. But when they're taught, I think they also show and prove that English can not only be a kind of a colonial weapon, but it could also be a decolonial resistance. And so many post-colonial writers, especially, who are writing in English, do just that. And they also prove that you can creolize or pidginize English as well. You can localize it or even indigenize English, as many Native American writers try to do. And so there are many kinds of Englishes, right, around the world. And so I think it's cool when English departments can study the different Englishes and the different politics where these literatures have emerged from. And in that sense, you could really see, again, the diversity and the complexity of English literature. In the Pacific, there's not just English literature, there's also French, some Spanish, written in other colonial languages, German too. And then there are a lot of Pacific writers who will write multilingually. So write in both English and Hawaiian, code switching sometimes in the same poem or even in the same line. So I think, the best departments, are the ones that embrace that kind of diversity and that kind of decolonial approach, because that is part of the heritage of English literature, in my opinion.
Thanks.
We have time for a couple more questions if folks have anything they want to share or clarify on. Okay.
I was giving y'all space, but I got it.
Okay. Done. Go.
I have a lot of things I want to say, but I was going to ask if you could do the poem where the teacher didn't know the word Guam was. I don't know if that's going to take too long, but that one I feel like it's crazy. That was the first thing. The second thing, we're talking about old school epistemologies of Talanoa talking and then versus contemporary, it's written down in text. And just want to commend Dr. Kava for putting this together where we're doing that, and the call and response, it's like the mix of the two. So, and then I think that we need to have more of these with more of our Pacifica people that are poets. And
Do you want to organize the next one? I'll help you. You want to do some? Let's do the next one. We have amazing writers in the Bay.
Yeah.
That's
the thing. I don't know none of the writers in the Bay.
We have Teresa Sianga Tono is out here. Lehua Tsaitono is out here. Tonga Victoria is out here. Yeah, and people are coming through the Bay all the time. So
I'm done.
Let's do it.
That sounds dope.
I would also love to hear your work.
I've been playing with the idea, honestly.
Don't play, do. Yeah. Let's go. All of you.
All right.
So the question is the poem
Yeah, that
about
one's fun.
poem. And then was the second one
I mean, it's just a comment. I feel like listening to your poetry is it's like a song. I've said this before. It's like listening to a Lil Wayne song and then you hear his punchline. You're like, God damn, that was a bar. And it be happening. You were saying our American dream is their American nightmare. I'm in the crowd like, oh my God, it's going crazy. And then there was another one. I should have wrote it down. Yeah, that's why I'm kind of asking for that specific one that I'm talking about. Because there's that one where you're talking about the Pacific Ocean. You ripped it out. I'm like, yo, that's crazy.
Well, I have to read that poem now. All right. Okay, there's this poem called Off Island Chamorros. And it's kind of a migration poem, basically. And off island Chamorros, that's what we call our people who migrate. They go off island as opposed to stay on island. Okay. My family migrated to California when I was 15 years old. During the first day at my new high school, the homeroom teacher asked us, "Where are you from?" "The Mariana Islands," I answered. He replied, "I've never heard of that place. Prove it exists." But when I stepped in front of the world map on the wall, it transformed into a mirror. The Pacific Ocean, like my body, was split in two and flayed to the margins. I found Australia, the Philippines, Japan. I pointed to an empty space between them and said, I'm from this invisible archipelago. Everyone laughed. And even though I descend from oceanic navigators, I felt so lost, shipwrecked on the coast of a strange continent. Are you a citizen? My teacher probed. Yes, my island Guam is a U.S. territory, I said. We attend American schools, eat American food, listen to American music, watch American movies, play American sports, learn American history, dream American dreams, and die in American wars. You speak English well, he proclaimed, with almost no accent. And this is what it means to be a diasporic Chamorro, to feel foreign in a domestic sense. Over the last 50 years, my people have migrated for jobs, schools, hospitals, adventure, and love. But most of all, we've migrated for military service, deployed and stationed to bases around the world. According to the 2010 census, 44,000 Chamorros live in California, 15,000 in Washington, 10,000 in Texas, 7,000 in Hawaii, and 70,000 more in every other state. We are the most geographically dispersed Pacific Islander population within the U.S., and off-island Chamorros now outnumber our on-island kin, with generations having been born away from our homelands, including my daughters. Some of us will be able to return home for holidays, weddings, and funerals. Others won't be able to afford the expensive plane ticket back to the Western Pacific. Years and even decades might pass between trips, and each visit will feel too short. We'll lose contact, and the island will continue to change until it becomes unfamiliar to us. This, too, is what it means to be a diasporic Chamorro, to feel foreign in our own homeland. And even after 30 years away, there are still times I feel adrift, without itinerary or destination, when I wonder, what if my family stayed? What if I returned? When the undertow of these questions begin pulling you out to sea, remember, migration flows through our blood like the aerial roots of the banyan tree. Remember, our ancestors taught us how to carry our culture in the canoes of our bodies. Remember, our people, scattered like stars, form new constellations when we gather. Remember, home is not simply a house, village, or island. Home is an archipelago of belonging. There you go.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. It's 5:30, the end of our event. Again, can we just also give yourselves a round of applause for performing and being part of our performances? I also want to thank our co-sponsors of this event, so the Department of Race and Resistance Studies, the Critical Pacific Island and Oceania Studies minor program, Climate HQ, and the ARC program. And just a little bit of housekeeping as well for my students in 275. Thank you so much for your attention. Make sure that you fill out your exit ticket and your name is on it. And Kayla, is it okay? As you leave, please make sure that you give your copy to Kayla. The To Island piece is yours to keep, if you would like. All right. Also for 275 folks, last bits is make sure that you have your copy of Po'otiki, all right, because you have readings, they're posted. Where you need to read to is up to page 58 in the novel, all right? So make sure you get your copy. If you need help, please let me know. And then we're gonna start working on Patricia Grace's novel. So read up to page 58. Those details are up there. If you have any questions, email me. Well done, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Good luck the rest of your semester.
Yes. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Yay.
That was awesome. Thank you for your great practice.